Before we get started this morning, the mission work of Texas Baptists pre-exists the existence of an organized state convention. The women of Texas were very interested in helping the German settlement in down by Waco, you know where the German settlement is. And so they were immigrants and they were new to Texas. They also were interested in the Tarrant area in a place called the Bowery, which is about where Seminary Hill is now. And that was the poor section in Tarrant Association. And so when Tarrant Association started, the women came and met the same time the men did. And they would come in their wagons from North Fort Worth, like down to Broadway, which was South Fort Worth at the time. And they had a coal porter, and this coal porter delivered Bibles and books for people to buy. And Mr. J.R. Good was the first coal porter elected. They got the wagon, and when they got to the meeting, they didn't have enough money for the horses. So the women took up a collection and paid for the horses to go along with this coal porter. And that was the beginning of missions in Tarrant Association. And since the women were coming to the meetings, they thought we ought to just get organized. So Tarrant Baptist Association women got organized out of that meeting when they did the annual meeting. And many times they took up a collection to help the men do what they were doing out of their egg money. But I thought you'd like to hear just a little bit of that before, because Miss Mary Hill Davis was during that time over in Dallas carrying on mission work. So I'm going to interview her, and we welcome you today to this program. And we have lots of things to do, and we have about 30 minutes to interview her, and she has to go on to do other things. So what I want to know is, were you born in Texas?
No, ma'am, I was not. I was born in Greenville, Georgia in 1860. When I was 3 years old, my family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Then when I was 10 years old, we moved to Dallas, Texas, and my parents joined First Baptist Church of Dallas. They were almost charter members because the church was only 2 years old. Later, when I was saved, I too joined First Baptist Church of Dallas and had the privilege of being a member there all of my life. It's just one of the really neat things. When I was 37 years old, Dr. George W. Truitt became my pastor, but that's another story.
Well, tell us about your family.
Well, actually, my parents could trace their ancestry all the way back to the French Huguenots who came to seek religious freedom in Virginia. But my parents were not only strong Christian and Baptist, but they also strongly believed that women should be educated. So they provided me with private tutors to ensure my education. When I was 20, I married F.S. Davis, who was a physician in Dallas. We had one son, Raymond, who became a surgeon. And I had the privilege of living in a 3-story brick home. We had servants, and with just one child, I was able to volunteer my time and efforts.
From what I've read, God provided Women's Missionary Union as your volunteer focus. Actually, it wasn't WMU, it was Baptist Women's Workers.
That is correct. But in 1919, it became Women's Missionary Union. So we'll just use WMU instead of the longer title today. But you are correct. I served as the recording secretary from 1896 to 1906. Then in 1906, I was voted president and remained in that capacity for 25 years. And during that time, I also had the privilege of serving as the vice president of the National Convention of WMU. During those years, gas, electrical energy, transportation, telephones were becoming very popular, but it was still difficult at times. And you see, Betty, one of my tasks was to go to downtown Dallas every Wednesday to edit the women's column for the Baptist Standard. And sometimes just communication and transportation alone made it difficult. But I really felt like God was calling me to that ministry.
Why did you feel called into ministry?
I believe my central calling was to enlist and empower women in the cause of Christ. I wanted women to expand their vision to see what the gospel could mean for the world and for their potential. I wanted them to join the great enterprise of missions.
What is your favorite aspect of ministry and why?
Oh, it's hard to choose just one, but I would say my special joy was helping women understand how important and useful they were in God's kingdom. And through the years, well, by 1921, I was able to make this statement. And Miss Betty, I knew you were going to ask me questions, so I went back and jotted down some of my quotes. So I
Okay.
get them correct. But I said, our women are realizing in a very practical way that the day is short, the task is great, and the master is urging. There is no time for failure, except for those who accept failure and believe in it. We're between Egypt and the Red Sea, and God will lead us across. Back in the far reaches of the past, before our Redeemer walked this earth, God called women. He called some to the battlefront, but great women who outflashed into the sacred record of the Bible their impress on the pages of time. Miriam, Deborah, Jael, other women who heard the high calling of God and responded. Betty, I just want the women of Texas to flare up and burn their mark into history.
Well, what are 3 most significant challenges and/or influences facing your ministry?
I like to speak in terms of maybe opportunity rather than challenges. My primary opportunity and commitment is to share the whole gospel with the whole world. As Texas Baptists, we have to look in 2 different directions. We have to look at the foreign field as well as the home field. As president of WMU, I tried to help Texas Baptists understand the unity between foreign and home. You see, the field is the world. Anywhere a soul can be saved, anywhere our Christ can be magnified, that is where our Christian sympathies and services must move.
There are many areas of opportunity that could and should require our focus to carry out the Great Commission in Texas. What would you consider the primary focus?
I believe the primary focus is education. We must equip and educate Texas Baptists if we're going to reach the world for Christ. One of my first actions as president in 1906 was to begin the Young Women's Auxiliary for our teenage girls. You see, we already knew civilization was embracing a new freedom, women's freedom, and Baptist women in particular would play a preeminent role through our mission efforts, and our girls needed to be prepared. But not only our girls, in 1908, we organized Royal Ambassadors, RAs for our boys, and in 1913, we organized Girls Auxiliary, GAs, for our girls. We needed to educate. I've always said the most important thing in the world is children, and nothing so interesting either. And I would really believe if you teach children missions, they will either become missionaries or they will send missionaries. And I know you believe that too, because the very first vacation Bible school west of the Mississippi River in 1916 was held in Fort Worth, Texas. right here in Gamble Street Baptist Church. So you too believed in teaching children. But it wasn't just our children and our teens. We also were able to help establish the Annie Jenkins Sally School for Girls in Kaifeng, China. And then we couldn't help, we had to support our Texas Girls School right here in Belton, Texas as well. I think it was 1913, the Texas Board of Education decided to start a campaign to raise $300,000 for our girls' school in Belton. I pledged Texas Baptist women to supply 1/3 of that. But they did. They joyfully jumped on board because they too knew the importance of training our girls. I was able to report that 500 girls walked the halls this year, in 1914. Can you imagine the power of those girls when they went out into the world and how they could affect affairs religious? Education. Well, there was also the opportunity to work with the Missionary Training School for Girls right here across the street at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. You see, Dr. Carroll had moved the seminary from Waco to Fort Worth in 1910. Well, may I back up and give you a little interesting story?
Yes, of course.
Well, we have to go back. 1896, Dr. Carroll spoke to our executive board of the WMU, and he told us we should disband. Well, one lady jumped up and said, well, Dr. Carroll, do you not feel that women can be used in church work? And he said, in my church, I organize my women in circles. If I need one type of work, I call on that circle. If I need a different character of work, I call on a different circle. And then Miss Mina Everett, you would have to know her. She was very vivacious and outspoken and very brave. She had already been traveling over the United States looking and writing for the Baptist Standard and identifying other opportunities for missions. Anyway, she not only jumped up, she went up. You see, Dr. Carroll had to use a trumpet because he couldn't hear. She got in his trumpet and she said, Dr. Carroll, will you please explain to us by what scriptural authority you organize your women? He looked at her in quiet dignity as only he could, laid down his trumpet, and that was it. Well, that was it for 14 years. We did not disband. 14 years later, he spoke to our executive council. He took simple stories of women in the Bible and glorified and magnified them like only a great preacher can. And when he concluded, he gave his unqualified endorsement for Texas WMU. Yes. So when he asked Texas WMU if we would take on the project of the Missionary Training School for Women on the campus, we were ready. And we immediately pledged $4,300. When the building was finished in 1915, it cost twice that much, but it still stands. I believe, Miss Betty, you call it Barnard Hall across the street. God is good and changes even the hearts of wonderful ministers.
Thank you for sharing. What is another ministry that is central to Texas missions?
Oh, social ministry. Social ministry is key. And Texas Baptists have always believed that we should minister to the whole person, social, physical, and religious. The work includes, of course, poverty relief, orphanages. In my day, it was kindergarten. I understand you have public kindergarten now, but the children in kindergarten. Hospitals and care for our retirees as well, to only name a few. As a matter of fact, when the training school opened across the street, it offered a settlement. I don't think you call it a settlement, perhaps a program, but it initially offered free kindergarten, night classes, and a reading room. So our Baptist women could come and share social ministries with the seminary students, as well as minister to the community and help with the kindergarten, because children were always important to us. Matter of fact, one point, I think it was 1913, I said, we should just pension mothers like we pension our soldiers. Then mothers and children would never go hungry. Another social ministry that I always promoted was the work of Dr. Robert Cook Buckner with the Orphans. However, in 1916, my remarks were very pointed because you see a fever had gone through the orphanage and they were in desperate need. And we had given such puny mites that year. Well, also encouraged, actually repeatedly encouraged Baptists to consider our retired ministers and their widows. They were living in poverty and we needed a plan. I also said, it seems to me a peculiar duty that we cannot in any wise shun or avoid what falls upon Texas Baptist women with regard to the widows of our Texas Baptist ministers. To me, it is such a tragedy, so overwhelming that it should bring us all to tears.
Well, is there another ministry of which you are concerned?
Yes, ma'am. Immigrants. Wow. During my time as president, large numbers of immigrants were coming to our American shores. It was exciting to see Texas Baptists reach out. By 1912, we had 30 Hispanic churches within our border. But there were other immigrants. I spoke to our ladies in 1914, and well, Marie Buhlmeyer was one of our missionaries in the port of Baltimore, and she was ministering to the unmet needs of the immigrants. And I said, why can't Texas Baptists do the same thing? Why can we not minister and meet the needs of the immigrants? We can share the gospel with the world without ever leaving Texas. God's bringing the world to us, and we must meet those needs. We must alleviate human suffering. It is part and parcel of our gospel call.
Well, why are you a Baptist?
Well, I believe Baptist principles can transform societies and change the lives of people around the world. Baptists have championed the concepts of freedom of conscience and freedom of religious liberty more than any other denomination. During World War I, I made the comment, if Baptist principles, which have blessed the world, are to be perpetuated, they are going to have to be rightly impressed upon the hearts and minds of our children. Baptists also need to find balance. We need to celebrate and preserve the very best that we are. But on the other hand, we need to be open to change and correction. There is no church, not even our Baptist one, that could not use reformation. You see, those who live in an echo chamber will rarely hear the voice of wisdom.
What excites you most about the Baptist General Convention of Texas?
The people. We've mentioned Dr. B.H. Carroll. We've mentioned Dr. Robert Buckner Cook at the philanthropist, the incomparable order, Mrs. Willie Dawson. Also, the Baptist educator, Samuel Taylor Brooks. Then there are Baptist colleges. I've already said what impact the girls would have, but now what impact boys and girls have leaving our Baptist schools, our Baptist hospitals. I believe the only way Texas Baptists could fail is if we have a lack of imagination or a lack of common sense. I had the opportunity in Dallas in 1921 to speak to the ladies. Well, actually, I shared a story that the old Scotch divine of Aberdeen said about common sense. And I think he was on the right track when he said to his class, "My dear gentlemen, as you pursue theology, you very much need three things: grace, knowledge, and common sense. If you haven't the first, ask of the Lord, he will give it to you. I plan to give you the second myself. And if you have not the third, just leave. Neither the Lord nor I, either one, can do anything for you at all." Common sense means tolerance, unselfishness, and the capacity to lead in the right course with intelligence, love, and honesty.
Ms. Davis, you said in Galveston in 1923, let me quote, "It seems fitting in this time of world chaos and untoward tendencies that we should call ourselves back to a new sense of loyalty to our cause. The feeling of unrest in social and political and religious life was never quite so, I've got my hand on, ministered aggressively as it is today." Now, this fits in with 2021. If there ever was a time when Christian hearts should call themselves back to the sense of loyalty to God and our organization work, the time is now upon us. Your words are true today, very true in Texas and the United States. Even now, we have social, political, and religious upsets. Do you have other words for us for today?
Texas during my lifetime, and it sounds like in your time, was a mission field with so many different cultures, with so many unmet needs. You know, it takes enthusiastic people motivated by love to reach out and meet those needs. I've often said, enthusiastic people may make blunders, but faint-hearted people, they never make anything. So I encourage you to be enthusiastic about the cause of Christ. You may think, as an individual, what can I do? It may be limited and trivial when viewed by itself, but remember, it is not just itself in itself. It is like a thread in a web is more than a thread. A link in a chain is more than a link. It is one bit of the whole, but the whole is immense, it's glorious, and it is eternal. I encourage you to be enthusiastic about sharing the gospel. How many people does it take to sit by the side of a sick friend? Just one. How many to provide food? Just one. How many to shine a light in the darkness or offer hope during a crisis? Just one. Betty, I believe it is as true today as it was in our annual meeting in 1928 when I said, it is not your church nor your convention, nor your board that issues the summons to the missionary task to you. It is Jesus Christ himself. When he said, go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature, the Great Commission. Betty, it was me. It is you. It is everyone here. We are Texas Missions fulfilling the Great Commission.
I have one more question. There was a story that your husband gave you a beautiful piece of jewelry and you asked him to take it back.
I did. He gave it to me for Christmas. It was during the Depression. Oh, it was a beautiful, beautiful amethyst necklace. But we talked about it. It's Depression. I'm thankful. But he took it back and we gave the money to help the Baylor School for Women. Yes.
So she could have worn that beautiful necklace as a doctor's wife, and yet they gave their money for missions. So that's exciting. I want to thank you for coming today and being with us from the past. It was very delightful to have you.
Thank you for having me. Now I must go rest.